Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time, the program that allows you to view imaginary conversations between interesting and immortal personalities. And I'd like to introduce you to our guest tonight. First of all, seated to my immediate right is my dear friend and co-host, former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Josephs. Welcome, Babette.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And seated next to Babette is President and General Charles DeGaulle. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. President.
Merci.
Seated next to President DeGaulle is Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. Welcome, Secretary Dulles.
Good evening.
And seated next to Secretary Dulles is Prime Minister Fidel Castro. Welcome.
Why not this?
We are going to tonight discuss something that is very close to my heart. So I will just throw the question out to the panel and hope that you will respond accordingly. We find ourselves celebrating an anniversary of the withdrawal of the U.S. troops in South Vietnam. What we will explore today is the backdrop of that war. Why were we, the United States, there? What did we intend to gain? Why did America decide Vietnam was a battle worth fighting for? And most importantly, what would have happened if the U.S. rabid anti-communism sentiment had not surfaced and allowed itself to influence our leaders? And I'm just going to throw that out to the panel. As I said, I am from a generation where Vietnam is still an open wound. And so I would ask President DeGaulle, you had experience in Vietnam, and it's my understanding that you offered advice which was not accepted.
That is correct. We experienced a defeat in French Indochina in 1954, and I was not president at the time, but we sent our elite troops there, and we were defeated by the native population who wanted their independence. This was a time of nationalistic movements throughout the world. And my advice to the United States at that time, and my advice to the United States now, it's an unwinnable situation. You could have not defeated the indigenous force in Vietnam. You wasted your treasure and your resources and your manpower needlessly, and the United States needed to apply the same type of reasoning now and not make the same mistakes in the current situations throughout the world.
I would beg to differ, Monsieur le Président. I believe that it is the sign of a nation's fortitude to be willing to continue a conflict to the very bitter end, if needs be, to put down and repress a communist upheaval.
And Mr. Secretary, fortitude, were you fighting? How about your fortitude? There were hundreds of thousands of young men and a lot of young women who came back in caskets to prove your fortitude.
It is expected of the citizens of the country to support its leaders and its government, obey its laws as is required.
Now I want to throw in something, because Secretary Dulles, what you are overlooking is the defeat that France suffered at Dien Bien Phu. I mean, in 1954, it was very clear that the indigenous people of South Vietnam did not want us there.
No Europeans.
They didn't want any Europeans. That's
we are
it's
not,
correct.
May I point out that we, as the United States, are not Europeans. We are Americans.
They couldn't
We are
tell the
we are
difference.
rather exceptional. Excuse me, Ms. Josephs. We are rather exceptional as a civilization.
Civilized?
We are,
Well-
yes, we are civil.
So what you're saying, Mr. Secretary, is that American exceptionalism will overcome all adversities, and the French, being, in your
Wimpy.
opinion, wimpy and weak, could not sustain a war by native populations in French Indochina.
That is the essence of it, sir.
You're absolutely wrong, sir, and you will live to regret that if you follow those policies. The fact of the matter is, we sent our elite forces there, probably better than any forces you have. These people will not be defeated. They want their freedom. They don't want to be a colonial entity anymore, and you are absolutely wrong, and American exceptionalism will not be exceptional. It'll be a failure.
I believe that when the
was a
indigenous
failure.
persons of the nation understand the values that have guided our own independence and
They
our
understood them
own,
very well. That's why they fought us.
yes, and
Why are our values better than their values?
And how can we take away people's homeland and force them into a way of life they're not interested in and say our values are better than theirs?
we are a more advanced civilization, and
Oh,
they
come
are
on.
far more backward than we
Are
we
you
are,
more-
and they are not capable of comprehending the modern capitalist international situation as
Well,
it
more
prevailed
power to 'em.
in the
I
1950s.
want to ask one question because I want to ask, please, I want to ask Prime Minister Castro to jump in here because you know what? United States exceptionalism, Prime Minister Castro's forces kicked our ass.
Yes, they did.
Por favor, there is nothing exceptional about America's fortitude, unless it is applied to imperialism and suppression of people's conviction to be free around the world. Tell me about your patriotism and your people and their embracing of your war tactics and your imperialism.
Well, the people made us get out of Vietnam.
We are
That
not
was
we are
the
not
way you
in
saw
a-
democracy work.
We are not an imperial power in the conventional sense.
And you're
we-
sad about that, I guess.
We are, like I said, we are not an imperial power in the conventional sense. We developed the indigenous peoples a government compatible to our own and open to the
Oh,
free
boy.
market system.
You want them to shut down their nation's capital every other
Mr.
day, I guess,
Secretary.
like we do.
Why would you continue to repeat the mistakes of the past and learn nothing from history when I am sitting here as a leader of a country that went through the same thing you're trying to go through now, and I am telling you categorically, you cannot win, you will not win, you will be bogged down there for a generation or more, you will expend tremendous amount of resources in treasure and manpower, and you will lose. What
No.
makes you think you will do any better than we did?
Because we, Monsieur le Président, are the United States of America, and our historical development shows that we are much respected throughout the world.
They hate us.
No.
Your
They hate us
your
every place.
children, your children do not respect you at home. Your people protest what you do to other people around the world, around todo el mundo. And todo el
He
mundo is the
humiliated
whole
us
world.
too. Castro,
I'm
the
glad
premier,
you
the
brought that up.
the prime minister did it.
The Bay of Pigs, your President Kennedy, very confused.
Then you try again. You don't give up. You continue until you achieve victory.
So
Isn't-
you bang your head against the wall and it hurts and you continue to do it because you like being
It's
hurt.
a sign of insanity to keep doing the same thing
Of
as over
course.
and over again, and you keep failing
It
over
is
and
a
over
sign
again.
of a virtuous and brave and strong individual.
Maybe that's
to-
the same as being insane. I don't know.
to continue a program until you attain victory.
I have a question.
And that is what we have failed to do. The only thing wrong we have failed
right,
to
you
do
have
is-
failed. So that's right. That's very correct. You have failed.
I love the word failure because I never hear it as a student of history. I never hear it in connection with United States foreign policy. Failure just does not seem to be an option, Secretary Dulles.
Because we are a nation of winners and we continue our wars until we win.
We continue.
Yes, we. And
We? We
yes, the
made you
people
get out
of the
of
United
Vietnam.
the people of the United States instinctively understand that when your government calls you to military service, you go.
This is
But
so-
this is not a military fight, sir.
This is
a fight for people's independence. These people are fighting against colonialism. This is not a war where they were
They're
attacked or
protecting
you
their
were attacked.
homes.
What
It is-
interest of the
I
United
wanna-
States
I wanna
are you
throw some
protecting there?
I want to throw some
the
background
business-
into this because it is important for us to understand, Secretary Dulles, that France had colonialized Indochina. And they had an experience in 1954 that demonstrated very clearly that the American exceptionalism that you speak of and all of the Western things that we were going to bring, we were going to help their agriculture, we were going to give them technology, we were going to teach them how to be better people. And the Vietnamese peasants could care less. What they wanted was freedom from colonialism. That is what they wanted. So, but it's important that we understand that because we propped up Diem. We propped up a man as president of South Vietnam. And I have to say to you, I'm very wary of this. I'm very concerned about the fact that this man had been almost a pawn, we thought, of United States aggression. And he shared something with President Kennedy that no one likes to talk about, but we're going to talk about it here because that's what we do here. We're going to talk about the fact that President Kennedy was a Catholic and Diem was a Catholic. And there seems to be some sort of notion as between them that they were going to control the will of the peasants in South Vietnam. Now, I know I threw a lot at you, so as a result of that, I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back, but I want you to respond to that. I want you to tell us why it is that we, as the United States, decided somehow that we were daddy and the South Vietnamese were our children. When we come back, we will have that discussion. So take a moment. I know I'm hard on you, but I always am, and that's why I'm pleased that you come back, Secretary Dulles.
And your president was a spoiled brat. Your President Kennedy was a spoiled brat.
We will
That's
be
true
back
enough.
in just a moment.
So here I am, waiting for a bus on a street corner when my friend Vivienne drives by in a car and says, "Babette, I want you. I need you." So I thought, sure, and I had a card with me, my business card. I gave it to her, and I thought, I probably won't hear from Vivienne again for a while, but right away she emailed me, she called me, and now I'm doing her concept, which is really, really interesting to make history alive and to relate it to what's happening now in our country and our world. And Vivienne dragged me into it. Oh, I can't say I really resisted too hard. And that's what I'm doing.
Welcome back to Conversations Across Time. You will recall when we first left you, I left with several questions that were fired at Secretary John Foster Dulles. I have said to you at the outset that this is a program that is very close to my heart. And I asked and I re-asked the question, what the hell were you thinking?
We were trying to prevent a communist takeover of another nation. We have lost China, we have lost the Eastern European nations to communist control, and also Korea, portions of Korea, and we are not going to allow it to happen.
Who's next? Who? Who is next?
What do you mean,
You
Mr.
cannot
Castro?
allow
about
you
who's
cannot allow communism to take over the world. So who is next?
next?
What other country is next for the United States to save?
All nations that stand for freedom,
Freedom.
and love freedom, and that's the whole crux of the matter. That is the whole crux of it.
Liberty.
It's either the United States and our democratic system or a communist tyranny.
Wait, did you ever have any evidence that the Russians, for instance, were interested in South Vietnam? There's no evidence of that.
We know the Russians, they had no interest in South Vietnam. The only interest they even had, Mr. Secretary of State, was that once we got involved, they felt obligated to move toward it. It was not a Cold War issue. I told your State Department that. I told your State Department you could get out of Southeast Asia with honor and glory without wasting treasure and manpower. But I think it's a matter of you guys think you're exceptional and you will lose just like we lost. And don't come back and tell me that you are different than we are, because then you're insulting the French people in my nation. We fought just as hard as you would fought, and we lost because these people do not want to be colonialized. They don't want to be ruled by the French. They don't want to be ruled for sure by the United States. They don't want to be ruled by Russia or China. They are nationalistic, and they will be nationalistic. And even if they're communism, if that's what these people want, if you're a Democrat, that's what they should have. They will not be allied with any other communist powers.
President DeGaulle, I want to interject one thing. When we talk about Dien Bien Phu, talk about the type of troops that you sent
We
there.
we had the French Foreign Legion, we had our elite paratroopers, we had our best generals, and we still lost.
To a bunch of peasants
To a bunch of peasants, that is correct.
who were defending their homes,
And
which is why
what
they
makes
won.
you think, Mr. Secretary, that the United States will fare any better? Why will these people accept you? They do not want to be colonialized. They want to be free.
We are not trying to colonialize these people, Monsieur le Président. We are trying to
Really?
offer to them.
Hard to tell.
We are trying to offer to them, Ms. Josephs, an alternative to communism.
What were you trying to offer Cuba? What was your offering? What did you come bearing gifts to the South, your neighbors? Mine.
Mr. Castro, you remember
I'm sorry, please, Prime Minister Castro.
Thank
It's
you.
just like the people
Thank
today
you.
don't want to call him President Obama. He is Prime Minister Castro. Why do you have such a problem with that?
because Ms. Crawford, as Secretary of the State of the United States, it is my duty to present and offer to the peoples of the world a viable alternative to communist domination. All this fine talk about the freedom of the indigenous peoples is simply that talk. It is a propaganda tool, Ms. Crawford, Mr. Castro, to establish a foothold of communism to another nation, establish a dictatorship.
Excuse me, civilized man, tell me this. What is the problem with your president in terms of respecting President DeGaulle's opinions based on experience?
Because even a Democrat such as Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Castro, truly understands the exceptional nature of the American experience. We ourselves were under colonial domination.
Right, and we threw it off.
And we established an independent, great nation through our own work, our own enterprise.
Your own
And we are
exceptionalism.
going to continue, and we are offering that example to the rest of the world.
What can you offer
What-
Cuba?
You didn't want, you cite American history and you say that you were oppressed by the British and that led to the American Revolution, and we helped you, my country helped you, because we believed in your freedom. And now you want to subjugate other people the
Right.
same way you were subjugated. That is totally
And you
hypocritical, Mr.
We-
Secretary. How do you justify
And you
that?
want to pretend that although we could beat the British for the same reason that the Vietnamese beat us, they were fighting a war across a ocean with people who were defending their homes and their families. And we did that in Vietnam, we're doing it in the Middle East, and we cannot win. We tried it in Cuba and we got our backsides whipped by the Prime
By
Minister here.
civilized peasants, or you call peasants, we are civilized people
They're farmers
who wanted liberty and justice and freedom.
and self-determination.
But Secretary Dulles, there's a question that I have. No one talks about this, and we're going to talk about it here. And that is the very notion that the president that the United States propped up in South Vietnam, Diem,
Yes.
was Catholic.
And
That the president of the United States, who for some reason thought it in his best interest to ignore the history and all of the information that they got from President DeGaulle, who was a general, we ignored all of that. My question is there some connection? Was there some reason that President Kennedy decided that he could ignore history because he had propped up someone in South Vietnam who shared his religion? And this is not an anti-Catholic statement. I'm just trying to understand where you guys were coming from. You, in fact, were Presbyterian, so you're not Catholic. I just need to understand why it is that we wanted to prop up, and believe me, Catholicism was a minority in Vietnam. And we will get to the point where the Buddhist monk actually set himself on fire to protest American aggression in Vietnam. And I am wondering, is there something that we don't know, that we don't get, that President Kennedy decided it was in the best interest of the United States to go forward with something that could absolutely not win? General DeGaulle, a general, a military man, and actually General MacArthur, it's my understanding, General MacArthur said, do not go to war in South Vietnam. You cannot win.
Our ambassador said, don't do this, and we just...
Oh, we ignored our
shoved
ambassador.
them
We
away.
just wanted to go forward. And I'm just trying to understand what it is that made us get to that point that we were so dogged and determined that we had to win in South Vietnam.
Yes. Yes, I'm glad you understand that, Ms. Josephs. You
See, he doesn't call me representative either, and I asked him
He's
to several
civilized.
times.
He is very civilized.
I've noticed that, Premier.
Well, we will call you John from now on.
Maybe.
Ladies and gentlemen, I must reiterate that it's always the Christian missionaries that enter into the lands of Africa and Asia
Yeah,
to,
that's what
to
I mean.
establish
More Christian
hospitals
missionaries.
and the
And
schools.
to civilize us, because we
Precisely,
know
Ms.
these poor native people don't know what they're doing.
Yes, and the Christians and Catholics in these, like such as the Catholics in Vietnam, were in the advanced guard of civilization in Vietnam, and those are the people we had to focus on
And what they
strengthen
did-
them so that they could continue
What
to
they did was
strengthen and
arrest-
civilize the remainder of Vietnam.
Arrest, jail, and do away with anybody who didn't stand with them and anybody who wasn't a Catholic. That was
What about the
very
Buddhists?
civilization.
What about
very
the Buddhists?
civilized.
What about the
about the
Buddhists that?
Buddhists?
Well,
That
what about the
immolated
Buddhists?
themselves.
Let me ask you this question: the Buddhists were treated shamefully by Diem, and the United States just seem to ignore it.
Subversives
Are they
have
not
to be
people? Are
repressed.
Buddhists not people? I'm sorry?
Subversives have to be repressed, Ms.
Are
Crawford.
Buddhists
Okay, well, Buddhists-
subversive?
Well, what's your definition of subversive? Because they want to practice their own religion. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution talks about freedom of religion, and you want to suppress people because they want to practice their religion. That's why they don't want us there in the first place, because they understand you will suppress them. Now, what is the, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to put this question to you straight. I warned the State Department, I warned President Eisenhower and President Kennedy about the quagmire in Southeast Asia. Why do you guys really want to be there?
Because we have established a very strong commercial interest in Vietnam.
Oh, now we're getting to the truth. Come on.
Yeah, yes, and the establishment of commercial interests, along with the presence of Christian missionaries, is very beneficial to the advancement of these peoples. So,
And we
Advancement
couldn't,
is a very nebulous term. Because advancement,
and we
according
couldn't
to whose
advance the
terms?
Come to
Cubans.
Cuba, I invite you to come advance us. Foreign advance.
See, I think what happened was that Kennedy looked terrible and the country looked pretty bad after he whopped our backsides at the Bay of Pigs.
Boy.
So in order to redeem himself and save face, you decided and you played on his simple emotions that Kennedy decided, well, we couldn't beat the people 4 steps from our mainland, so let's go 3/4 of the way around the world and beat them up. You couldn't do that either.
He was a little boy. He was like a spoiled boy. He was trying to be a bully, but he was a spoiled boy.
President Kennedy was a
He
spoiled
was a
boy.
spoiled boy because he had lost the first game. He wanted to win a game somewhere.
And I appreciate that, because I believe, and of course, you know, we always have to come back and examine these questions, but I believe that it bears examination now. We now need to look at what was going on in the mindset of President Kennedy, that we have Prime Minister DeGaulle trying to advise him. We have President DeGaulle, I'm sorry, and we have Prime Minister Castro, who kind of whipped our behinds. And they're all looking at this, and they're dealing with a spoiled boy. Now, the interesting thing about that is President John Kennedy enjoys such a wonderful reputation in this country. And we can talk about that. But there was some reason that we need to look at what was it in his mindset that allowed him to go into a country he had no hopes of winning. I don't care how you look at it. The French had possessed Indochina for 100 years, and they said, gotta get out. When we need to invite you back so that we can discuss this, because I don't feel satisfied, and I don't think I don't think Babette, are you satisfied? We have not gotten a satisfactory answer as to why this happened. So when we'll invite you back, and we will continue this discussion, because Vietnam is close to my heart and very important for us to discuss. We look forward to you coming back.
I would be happy to.
Yes.
And I thank you for joining us. This is a heated discussion. Vietnam is something that we need to talk about. We will take this up again. The panel will come back, and we will rejoin this conversation across time. Thank you.
Conversations across time, 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 across time, conversations across time.